I secretly filmed my family's shock when they believed I was gone forever, and ever since, nothing about them feels the same to me. It started as a stupid prank idea that spiraled into something that destroyed my entire world. The kind of impulsive decision that seems brilliant at 19, but reveals itself as monumentally stupid once the consequences start rolling in. I was home from college for winter break in Maplewood, Ohio, feeling like a ghost in my own house. My older brother, Ethan, had just gotten engaged to his perfect girlfriend, Chloe, a physical therapist with a trust fund, and the kind of laugh that made everyone turn around. They spent every dinner discussing wedding venues while Mom took notes like she was planning a military operation. My younger sister Quinn was the family golden child on a roll since kindergarten. Varsity soccer captain already accepted to 3 Ivy League schools, Cornell, University of Pennsylvania, Dartmouth, as a junior. She had this way of making everything look effortless. Straight A's, athletic scholarships, volunteer work at the animal shelter. Meanwhile, I was the middle kid who'd barely scraped through freshman year with a 2.1 GPA. I'd switched majors 3 times, lost my academic scholarship, and was considering dropping out to work at my roommate's uncle's auto shop. Every conversation with my parents ended with them asking what my plan was. At dinner, they'd forgotten my birthday again. It was December 18th, my 20th birthday, and nobody mentioned it. Dad was going on about Ethan's promotion at the advertising agency. Mom was showing neighbor photos of Quinn's latest academic award ceremony. I sat there eating meatloaf, completely invisible. When I tried to mention that my sociology professor had complimented my final essay, Dad just nodded and asked Ethan about his year-end bonus. That's when I remembered the old storm drain tunnel that ran under our neighborhood. As kids, we dared each other to crawl through it, but it was considered too dangerous after some kids supposedly got trapped during a flash flood years ago. The plan formed in my head: disappear for a few hours, leave some evidence by the tunnel entrance, let them think something terrible happened. I'd hide in the abandoned barn behind the Miller's property where I'd already stashed supplies just long enough to see if they'd actually care that I was gone. I planted my favorite shoes and torn jacket by the tunnel opening during their Friday night game night. Made sure my phone would ping one last location there before shutting off. Then I hiked to my hiding spot with a spare phone I bought with cash. But here's the thing about thinking you're smart at 19. You're usually just spectacularly stupid. I'd hidden a tiny voice recorder in the living room bookshelf weeks earlier when I suspected Mom of reading my diary. I'd planned to catch her snooping, but forgot about it until now. The battery could record for 12 hours straight. From the barn, I called 911 from the burner phone, disguising my voice to report someone screaming from the tunnel area. Then I waited for my family to notice I was missing and panic. It took them 6 hours, 6 whole hours before anyone realized I wasn't in my room. When the police knocked at 2 a.m., I watched through binoculars as my family stumbled to the door in their pajamas. The officer explained they'd found evidence of someone potentially trapped in the storm drain system. Search and rescue was being called. I expected immediate hysteria, tears streaming down Mom's face, Dad collapsing with worry, the kind of dramatic grief you see in movies. Instead, I watched Dad nod calmly and invite the officer inside for coffee. The recorder captured everything they said next. "How long has your son been missing?" Officer Ramirez asked. Settling into our kitchen chair like this was a routine wellness check. I could hear the scraping of chair legs against our hardwood floor, the familiar creak of our old house settling around them. "We're honestly not sure," Mom said, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when talking to teachers about my poor grades, patient, but slightly exasperated. "He's been difficult lately. We thought he was just hiding in his room, being moody like he usually does." The word difficult hit me like a slap. I was struggling with depression, feeling invisible in my own family, but to them, I was just difficult, a problem to be managed rather than a person to be understood. "Has he displayed any concerning behaviors recently?" Officer Ramirez continued, and I could hear him flipping through pages in his notebook. "Any talk of self-harm or running away?" "Not directly," Dad replied, and I could picture him leaning back in his chair the way he did during serious conversations. "But he's been very dramatic lately, always looking for attention since he was little. You know how some kids just have that personality? Everything's a crisis. Everything's the end of the world." My stomach twisted hearing him reduce my genuine emotional struggles to attention-seeking behavior. Every time I tried to talk to them about feeling overwhelmed or lost, they dismissed it as dramatics. What about his academic performance? The officer asked. Sometimes school stress can contribute to these situations. He's failing out of college, Ethan interjected. And I could hear him moving around the kitchen, probably making himself a sandwich like this was just another late-night conversation. Got kicked off academic probation this semester. Been talking about dropping out completely. That must be stressful for the whole family. Officer Ramirez said diplomatically. It is, Mom agreed, sighing heavily. We've invested so much money in his education and he just doesn't seem to care. $43,000 a year, and he's treating it like a joke. The way she said it made my college struggles sound like a personal attack on the family finances rather than a young person trying to figure out their path in life. I have to ask a difficult question. Officer Ramirez continued, his voice becoming more serious. Based on his recent behavior and statements, is there any reason to believe he might harm himself? The silence that followed felt eternal. I held my breath, waiting for them to immediately defend me, to say I'd never expressed suicidal thoughts, to explain that I was just going through a rough patch like millions of college students. Honestly, Mom's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. We've been worried about his mental state for months. He's been increasingly unstable since he got home from school. Sleeping all day, staying up all night, hardly eating meals with the family. Unstable. The word echoed in my head like a death sentence. My irregular sleep schedule and loss of appetite, classic signs of depression, were being reframed as evidence of mental instability. He failed most of his classes this semester, Ethan added. And I could hear him chewing, actually eating while discussing my potential suicide. Came home talking about how everyone was better off without him. Really concerning stuff about not being good enough for this family. That was a complete fabrication. I had never said anyone was better off without me. I'd mentioned feeling like I didn't fit in, like I couldn't live up to their expectations, but never anything that dramatic. We tried getting him counseling last year, Mom continued, her voice gaining momentum as she built her case, but he refused to continue after the first few sessions, said the therapist didn't understand him and was asking stupid questions. That was partially true, but missing crucial context. Dr. Wallace had spent our sessions asking about childhood trauma and family dysfunction when what I really needed was help with time management and academic anxiety. When I'd asked my parents if we could try a different therapist who specialized in college transition issues, they'd said counseling was too expensive and I needed to make it work with Dr. Wallace. Has he ever exhibited violent tendencies? Officer Ramirez asked. Toward himself or others? Not violent exactly, Dad said carefully, but he has a temper. Slammed his bedroom door so hard last week that he cracked the frame. Punched a hole in his wall last month when we told him he couldn't go on spring break with his friends because of his grades. I had slammed my door once after they'd screamed at me for an hour about my GPA. And the hole in my wall happened when I'd been having a panic attack about an exam and needed a physical outlet for the overwhelming anxiety. But they made it sound like I was regularly violent and destructive. The questions continued for another 20 minutes. Officer Ramirez asked about my friends, my hobbies, any signs of drug or alcohol use. My family answered like they were discussing a troubled neighbor rather than their son and brother. Every response was clinical, detached, focused on my problems rather than my humanity. They mentioned that I'd been moody since middle school, challenging since high school, and increasingly concerning since starting college. They painted a picture of a young man spiraling toward inevitable self-destruction, someone they'd been watching with growing worry and dread. But what struck me most was how prepared they sounded, like they'd been rehearsing these answers, thinking through these scenarios, like my potential death was something they had already considered and discussed. We've honestly been walking on eggshells around him, Mom said toward the end of the interview, never knowing what might set him off or send him into one of his episodes. It's been affecting the whole family dynamic episodes like I was mentally ill rather than just struggling. Officer Ramirez's radio crackled with updates from the search team. Through my binoculars, I could see more emergency vehicles arriving, their red and blue lights painting our suburban street in urgent colors. Real people were risking their lives crawling through dangerous underground tunnels because of my stupid prank. We'll need to search his room, Officer Ramirez said. Sometimes we can find clues about his state of mind or intentions. Of course, Dad said immediately. Whatever you need. I watched them lead the officer upstairs, their footsteps heavy on the wooden stairs I'd climbed thousands of times as a child. They were about to rifle through my private space, looking for evidence of suicidal ideation or plans to run away. The recorder continued capturing their conversation as they returned to the kitchen. "Poor officer," Mom said once they were alone again. "Having to deal with this kind of thing on a Friday night." "At least they're taking it seriously," Ethan replied, "even though we all know what probably happened." "What do you mean?" Quinn asked. She'd been quiet during most of the police interview, probably scared and confused about everything happening. "Come on, Quinn," Ethan said, his voice gentle but certain. "You've seen how he's been acting, the mood swings, the isolation, the talk about not being good enough. This was probably inevitable." My sister made a small sound that might have been a sob. You think he hurt himself?" "I think he's been crying for help for months," Mom said, her voice taking on that patient explaining tone she used with children, "and we tried to help him, but you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved." The casual certainty in her voice chilled me. She wasn't just speculating about my death. She was explaining it, rationalizing it, making peace with it. "Should we call Aunt Carol and Uncle Mark?" Quinn asked through tears. "They should know what's happening." "Not yet," Dad said quickly. "Let's see what the search turns up first. No point worrying the whole extended family until we know something concrete." Mom said slowly, and there was something different in her tone that made my blood freeze, something calculating. "Maybe this is for the best." The silence that followed was deafening. Even through the recording, I could feel the weight of those words settling over the kitchen like a dark cloud. "What do you mean?" Ethan asked, and even he sounded uncertain about where this conversation was heading. "Think about it logically," Mom continued, her voice gaining confidence as she organized her thoughts. "He's been nothing but problems since middle school. The therapy bills alone have cost us thousands of dollars over the years. Now he's flunking out of the college we're paying $43,000 a year for." "Mom," Quinn started, but her voice was weak, overwhelmed. "I'm just saying, honey, we've done everything we possibly could for him. We got him tutors when he struggled in high school. We paid for SAT prep courses. We got him counseling when he seemed depressed. We tried medication for his ADHD." She paused, and I could hear her moving around the kitchen, probably putting away dishes or wiping down counters like she always did when thinking through problems. "Nothing worked. He's resistant to every form of help we try to give him. The kid's just broken," Dad said bluntly. "Some people are born with something wrong in their heads. We could spend another $100,000 on college and therapy, and he'd still end up working at a convenience store somewhere." Broken. The word hit me harder than any physical blow could have. My own father thought I was fundamentally, irreparably broken. If something happened tonight," Mom continued carefully, "maybe it's a blessing in disguise, a mercy even." "Jesus, Mom," Ethan said, but he didn't sound horrified. He sounded tired, like this was a conversation they'd had before. "That's pretty cold, even for you." "I know how that sounds," she said quickly, defensively. "But think about the stress it would relieve for everyone. No more fighting about his grades every semester. No more worrying about what kind of trouble he'll get into next. No more walking on eggshells around his moods and outbursts." "The life insurance policy," Dad said quietly, and my world completely shattered. "It's still active until he turns 21. We're paying premiums on $150,000 policy through my work." They were calculating my monetary value. Sitting in our kitchen at 3 a.m. with search teams risking their lives to find my body. My parents were discussing how much money my death would bring them. "That would cover Quinn's college completely," Mom said, and I could hear papers rustling like she was actually doing math. "Stanford's expensive, but this would handle 4 years plus graduate school if she wants it. Full tuition, room and board, everything. And there'd be enough left over to help with Ethan's wedding," Dad added. "Maybe the down payment on a house, too. Chloe's been looking at those new developments in Cedarbrook. They were talking about my death like a financial windfall. Like my life insurance was a better investment than my actual life." "I know it sounds horrible to think about money at a time like this," Mom continued, her voice becoming more animated as she warmed to the topic. "But we have to be practical. We've already spent so much on him. Therapy, tutoring, college tuition, his car, his living expenses. At least this way, some good could come from all this tragedy. He's been sucking up family resources for years," Dad agreed. "Every dollar we spend on his problems is a dollar we can invest in Quinn's future or Ethan's success. Kid's like a financial black hole. Maybe some people are just meant to struggle, Mom said philosophically. Maybe this is natural selection working itself out. He's never been able to adapt to normal social expectations or academic standards. I listened to my family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, discussing how my death would improve their lives financially and emotionally. They talked about me like I was a bad investment that had finally reached maturity, a problem that had solved itself through elimination. We should probably think about how to handle this with the community, Ethan said after a long pause. People will expect us to be devastated. There will be sympathy casseroles and memorial services and all that. Of course, we'll be appropriately upset, Mom said like she was planning a dinner party. He was our son. We loved him despite his problems. Loved. Past tense. I was already dead to them. We'll need to plan some kind of memorial service, she continued. Nothing too elaborate given the circumstances. Maybe just a small gathering at the church with Pastor Davis. What about a scholarship fund? Dad suggested. Something for troubled kids or mental health awareness. It would look good. And maybe help with the tax situation. They spent the next hour discussing the logistics of my death. Like event planners, how to handle media attention if the story gained traction, whether to set up a GoFundMe for other families dealing with mental health crisis, what kind of photo to use for newspaper obituaries, something recent that showed how troubled I'd become, or an older picture from when I still looked happy. We should probably get rid of his stuff fairly quickly, Mom said practically. Keeping a shrine isn't healthy for anyone, and we could use his room for other purposes. Salvation Army, Dad agreed. Most of it's junk anyway. The electronics might have some value, but his clothes are all wrong sizes for anyone in the family. I want to keep some things, Quinn said quietly. It was the first time she'd spoken in over an hour. Some of his books, maybe. Or his guitar. Of course, sweetheart, Mom said in that indulgent tone she used when humoring children. You can pick out a few mementos, but we can't keep everything. It's not healthy to live in the past. The search continued for 3 agonizing days, and I documented every moment through my binoculars and the ongoing recordings from devices I'd planted throughout the house. Watching my family perform grief while planning my estate was like watching a play where I was the only one who knew the actors were just reciting lines. During the day, when news cameras were rolling and neighbors were watching, they played their parts perfectly. Mom dabbed at her eyes with tissues that never seemed to run out. Dad spoke to reporters about hoping for a miracle while keeping one strong, protective arm around Quinn. Ethan fielded phone calls from relatives and college friends, his voice heavy with appropriate sorrow. They looked exactly like the devastated family everyone expected to see. The community rallied around them with an outpouring of support that was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. Neighbors organized meal trains. The church set up a prayer circle. Local businesses donated money to support the search efforts. But at night, when the cameras packed up and the volunteers went home, I heard them through my hidden recorders planning their next moves with the cold efficiency of a corporate boardroom. Action News 12 wants to do a follow-up interview tomorrow, Dad reported during their second night of grief. Something about the dangers of mental health issues in college students. Perfect, Mom replied. We should emphasize how we tried to get him help, but he resisted treatment. Really drive home that some kids just can't be saved despite their parents' best efforts. Should I mention the insurance policy? Dad asked. Sometimes these stories generate donations. Too soon, Ethan advised. Let people offer first. We don't want to look opportunistic. They discussed which photos to release to the media, what details about my mental health to share publicly, and how to frame my disappearance in a way that generated maximum sympathy without making them look negligent. We need to be careful about the timeline, Mom said. If people start asking why we didn't notice he was missing for 6 hours, it might look bad. We were all asleep, Dad said firmly. It was the middle of the night. Normal families don't check on their adult children every hour. But I knew the truth. They hadn't checked on me because they didn't think about me. I was invisible in my own home, a background presence they noticed only when I was causing problems. The search teams worked 18-hour shifts following every lead, checking every branch of the tunnel system that snaked beneath our suburban neighborhood. I watched grown men and women emerge from those underground passages covered in mud and exhaustion, still determined to find any trace of me. Captain O'Malley, the fire chief coordinating the rescue efforts, held daily press conferences, updating the community on their progress. His voice grew more hoarse with each briefing. his eyes more red-rimmed from lack of sleep. "We're not giving up," he said on day 3, his voice cracking slightly. "Every family deserves closure. Every child deserves to come home." Meanwhile, my actual family was at home discussing whether to donate my computer to charity or sell it online for extra money. The laptop's only 2 years old, Dad mentioned during their third night of freedom from my presence. Probably worth $600 or $700. eBay, Ethan suggested. Better prices than the pawn shops. They'd also started cleaning out my room, sorting through my belongings like vultures picking over a carcass. Through my bedroom window recorder, I heard them rifling through my drawers, making piles of what to keep, sell, or throw away. "This diary might be important," Mom said. And I realized she'd found my old journal from high school. "The police might want to see it for clues about his mental state." "What's it say?" Quinn asked. "Typical teenager stuff," Mom replied dismissively. Complaining about feeling misunderstood, rambling about his future, some poetry that doesn't make much sense. She was reading my most private thoughts aloud, like a grocery list, looking for evidence to support their narrative of my instability. Those journal entries represented years of genuine emotion and self-reflection, but to her, they were just more proof that I was troubled. On day 3, they officially called off the search. My body was presumed lost in the underground water system that connected to the Willow Creek. The current was too strong during winter months. The passage is too unstable for continued rescue efforts. Captain O'Malley made the announcement with tears in his eyes. "We've exhausted all possible search areas. I'm sorry we couldn't bring him home." That evening, I watched through my binoculars as our house filled with neighbors, church members, and family friends offering condolences and support. They brought enough casseroles and baked goods to feed an army. People hugged my parents, whispered words of comfort, and promised to keep our family in their prayers. My family accepted these gestures with appropriate gratitude and sorrow. They nodded sadly, thanked everyone for their kindness, and spoke about how much the community support meant during this difficult time. But after the last visitor left, I heard Dad open a beer and Mom run a bath. The sounds of relief were unmistakable. The performance was over, and they could finally relax. "Thank God that's done with," Mom said, her voice echoing from the bathroom. "I don't think I could have kept up the grieving mother act much longer." "The whole thing was exhausting," Dad agreed. "All those people expecting us to be emotional wrecks, like we're supposed to fall apart, just because he finally did something we all saw coming." That night, while they were at a late dinner with Pastor Davis, supposedly planning my memorial service, I crept back into the house through the basement window I'd left unlocked. My childhood home felt like a foreign country now. Every familiar surface and smell tainted by what I'd learned about my family's true feelings. I moved through the house like a ghost, gathering the recorders and a few personal items I couldn't bear to leave behind. My hands shook as I packed a duffel bag with clothes, my laptop, and the small amount of cash I'd saved from my work-study job. Before leaving, I sat at my old desk and wrote a note on my favorite stationery, the paper Quinn had given me for my 18th birthday. "Found out what you really think of me. Goodbye forever." I left it on my pillow, knowing they'd find it when they came to finish cleaning out my room. Let them wonder if I'd been alive the whole time. Let them question every conversation they'd had about my death benefits and their relief at my disappearance. By dawn, I was on a Greyhound bus to Portland, Oregon with $300 in cash, a duffel bag of clothes, and a phone full of recordings that proved my family saw me as a financial burden rather than a human being worthy of love. I'd chosen Portland because it was far enough away to disappear completely, but large enough to find work without too many questions. Plus, Oregon had a reputation for accepting misfits and people starting over, which felt appropriate for someone who'd literally faked their own death to escape their family. The bus ride took 36 hours with stops in Chicago, Denver, and Salt Lake City. I spent most of the journey staring out windows at landscapes I'd never seen, feeling simultaneously terrified and liberated. For the first time in my life, nobody knew where I was or what I was supposed to be doing. The freedom was intoxicating and overwhelming. In Portland, I rented a tiny studio apartment in a converted warehouse in the industrial district. The building was full of artists, musicians, and other people who seemed to be running from something or towards something. Nobody asked intrusive questions about my background or why a 19-year-old was living alone so far from home. I found work at a shipping warehouse, loading trucks and managing inventory. The job was physical and mindless, exactly what I needed while processing the emotional trauma of learning my family would profit from my death. My supervisor, Javier, was a 40-year-old former Marine who treated everyone with respect and saw potential in people others had written off. "You're smart," he told me. "After my first month, I can tell. You don't have to load boxes forever if you don't want to." He was right. Once I started paying attention, I discovered I had a natural talent for logistics and organization. I could see patterns in shipping routes, anticipate inventory needs, and streamline processes that had been inefficient for years. Within 6 months, I was promoted to assistant warehouse manager. For the first time in my life, I was succeeding at something without constant criticism or disappointment. Javier and my coworkers praised my initiative and reliability. They appreciated my contributions instead of focusing on my failures. I also started taking night classes at Portland Community College, working toward my GED and eventually a degree in supply chain management. The smaller class sizes and supportive atmosphere were completely different from the overwhelming pressure I'd felt at my expensive 4-year university. But the healing process wasn't linear. Some nights I'd wake up in a cold sweat, hearing my mother's voice saying, "Maybe this is for the best." Other times, I'd catch myself planning what I'd say if I ever saw them again, imagining confrontations that would never happen. I started seeing a counselor at the community college, Dr. Evelyn Reed, a woman who specialized in family trauma and identity issues. Unlike Dr. Wallace back home, she actually listened to what I was saying instead of looking for textbook problems to diagnose. "It sounds like you were never allowed to be yourself in that environment," she said during one of our sessions. "You were constantly being measured against other people's expectations instead of being valued for who you actually are." She helped me understand that my family's reaction wasn't really about me. It was about their own limitations, their inability to love unconditionally, their need to maintain a perfect family image, even at the cost of one of their children. "Some people can only love others when it's convenient," she explained. "When it makes them look good or feel good about themselves. That's not real love. That's emotional selfishness." For 2 years, I successfully avoided all social media platforms, news from my hometown, and anything that might trigger memories of my old life. I focused on moving forward, building something new, becoming someone different from the broken kid my family had written off. I made friends with my coworkers and classmates, people who knew me as the reliable guy who always showed up on time, who could fix problems and make people laugh. They had no idea about my dramatic backstory, and I preferred it that way. Until Quinn found me. She'd hired a private investigator on her 18th birthday, using money from her college fund to track me down. The detective had followed digital breadcrumbs, my GED enrollment, my warehouse employment records, my community college transcripts across 3 states to my apartment building in Portland. When I opened my door on a Tuesday evening in March, expecting a pizza delivery, my baby sister was standing there holding a manila folder full of documents and photographs. She'd grown up in the 2 years since I'd seen her. Taller with shorter hair and more serious eyes, but still recognizably the sister I'd loved despite everything. "I knew you were alive," she said, and then collapsed in tears on my doorstep. I stood there frozen, not sure whether to hug her or close the door. Part of me wanted to pretend I was someone else, to claim she had the wrong apartment. But seeing her cry broke something inside me that I'd been carefully protecting for 2 years. I let her in and made coffee while she composed herself. Both of us sitting awkwardly in my small living space like strangers who happened to share DNA. "I never agreed with them," she said, her voice shaking as she wrapped her hands around the coffee mug. "I fought with Mom and Dad every single day after you disappeared. I knew you were alive somewhere. I could feel it in my bones." She told me everything that had happened after my fake death. How the family had imploded within months. How the community had turned against my parents when details about their behavior during the search started spreading. "Mrs. Jenkins from next door started talking," Quinn explained. She mentioned how calm Mom seemed during the search, how she'd seen Dad watching TV while volunteers were organizing search parties. People started putting pieces together. Apparently, several volunteers had noticed my parents' lack of genuine emotion and started asking uncomfortable questions. Why weren't they out searching with everyone else? Why did they seem more concerned about media interviews than finding their son? Why were they discussing practical matters instead of holding on to hope? Mom and Dad divorced within 8 months. Quinn continued. staring into her coffee like she was reading tea leaves. They kept blaming each other for driving you away. Mom said Dad was too critical and demanding. Dad said Mom enabled your problems instead of helping you fix them. The marriage had cracked under the weight of guilt, public scrutiny, and mutual resentment. Neighbors who had initially offered support started whispering about how strange it was that they seemed so relieved rather than devastated. Ethan's fiancée left him 2 weeks after the memorial service. She continued, Chloe said she'd overheard Dad talking to his brother about the financial benefits of your death, and it made her physically sick. She told people at the Lakeshore Club, and the story spread from there. Ethan had spiraled into guilt and depression, spending most of his time drinking alone and replaying every conversation where he dismissed my problems or made jokes about my failures. He'd apparently confessed to multiple therapists that he felt directly responsible for his brother's suicide. He keeps your picture on his nightstand, Quinn said quietly. Talks to it sometimes when he thinks nobody's listening. Says he's sorry for calling you dramatic and attention-seeking. Too little, too late, I said. But the words came out harder than I had intended. They're all different people now, she continued. Dad lives in a studio apartment downtown and drinks too much. Lost his job at the firm because he couldn't focus. Mom moved to Arizona 6 months ago and barely talks to anyone. She works at a library in Scottsdale and pretends she never had a son named Liam. The revelation that Mom had essentially erased me from her narrative wasn't surprising, but it still stung. She'd moved across the country to escape the consequences of her choices, starting fresh where nobody knew about her dead son or the rumors surrounding his disappearance. Ethan's the only one who stayed, Quinn said. He's in therapy 3 times a week, guilt-ridden about everything he said about you. Keeps talking about how he should have been a better brother. Good, I said, and meant it. They should all feel guilty. They should all suffer for what they did. They want to see you, she said carefully, watching my face for reactions. They want to apologize to try to explain their behavior that night. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just sharp, bitter sound that didn't belong in my small apartment. Explain what? That they wished I was dead. That they planned to spend my life insurance money on Ethan's wedding and your college tuition. I heard everything, Quinn. Every word. Her face went white, color draining from her cheeks like someone had pulled a plug. What do you mean you heard everything? I told her about the recorder I'd hidden in the living room bookshelf. About listening to their conversations while hiding in the Miller's barn. About hearing them discuss my death like a business opportunity while search teams risked their lives in those tunnels. I played her some of the audio I'd saved on my phone over the years. Insurance against my own memories. Proof that I hadn't imagined or exaggerated their cruelty. Mom's voice saying, maybe this is for the best. Dad calculating my monetary value down to the last dollar. Their detailed discussion about acting appropriately upset for the cameras. Quinn listened with her hands covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face as she heard our parents' true feelings about their missing son. I didn't know, she whispered when the recording ended, her voice small and broken. I swear to God, I had no idea they were saying things like that. I was at soccer practice when the police came that first night. By the time I got home, they'd already decided how to handle everything. They told me you were probably dead, and we needed to be strong for each other. I believed her. Quinn had been 16, focused on her own life and achievements. She wouldn't have been included in the adults' private conversations about insurance money and relief at my disappearance. I kept insisting you were alive, she continued through her tears. I made them keep your room exactly the same. I put up missing person flyers around town, even after they stopped the official search. Mom and Dad got so angry at me for not accepting reality and living in denial. She'd spent her senior year of high school fighting with our parents about their lack of genuine grief, their eagerness to move on with their lives, their refusal to keep looking for me. When she'd suggested hiring a private investigator with her college fund money, Dad had threatened to have her evaluated for psychiatric problems. That's when I knew something was really wrong, she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. What kind of parent tries to stop their child from searching for their missing sibling? What kind of family gives up hope after 3 days? We talked until sunrise, both of us exhausted but unable to stop. She told me about the rest of high school, about getting into Stanford, about her plans to study social work with a focus on family therapy. I told her about my job, my friends, my quiet but satisfying life in Portland. Neither of us mentioned our parents much during those conversations. The topic was too raw, too complicated to navigate in one night. What do you want from me? I asked as dawn light filtered through my apartment windows. The question sounded harsher than I'd intended, but I needed to know her expectations. Nothing, she said immediately, shaking her head. I just needed to know you were okay. I needed to tell you that at least one person in that family never stopped loving you, never stopped believing you were worth searching for. The simple honesty of her words broke something loose in my chest that I'd been holding tight for 2 years. What do you want me to tell them? She asked as she prepared to leave for the airport. About finding you. I thought about it for a long time, weighing my options carefully. Part of me wanted her to tell them I was successful and happy to make them regret their choices and live with the knowledge that they'd lost someone valuable. Part of me wanted her to say nothing, to let them live with uncertainty forever. Tell them I forgave them, I said finally after watching the morning traffic build on the street outside my window. But tell them I can never trust them again. Tell them I'm happy, I'm healthy, and I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Will I see you again? She asked, her voice small and hopeful. Maybe, I said. Honestly, when you graduate college, if you want to, and if you can respect my boundaries about the rest of the family. She hugged me goodbye, the first physical affection I'd received from anyone in my biological family for over 2 years, and promised to respect my privacy. She also promised to stop fighting with our parents about my disappearance, to let them believe whatever they needed to believe about my fate. I won't tell them I found you unless you want me to, she said. This is your choice, your life now. After she left, I sat in my apartment feeling emotionally drained, but somehow lighter than I'd felt in years, knowing that at least one member of my family had genuinely mourned my disappearance, had never stopped looking for me, had loved me enough to hire a detective and fly across the country. It didn't heal all the wounds, but it helped. 6 months later, I received a package with no return address and a Portland postmark. Inside was a newspaper clipping from my hometown announcing my father's death from liver failure. He drunk himself to death within 3 years of my fake disappearance. Unable to cope with the guilt and community judgment that followed the rumors about his behavior during the search. The obituary was brief and formal. Thomas Alexander Morrison, 52, died peacefully at St. Jude's Medical Center after a long illness. He has survived by his daughter, Quinn Morrison of Palo Alto, California, his son, Ethan Morrison of Columbus, Ohio, and son, Liam Morrison, whose location remains unknown. I read the notice 3 times, waiting to feel something. Sadness, satisfaction, closure, anger. Instead, I felt nothing, just emptiness where complicated father-son emotions should have been. The article mentioned that services would be private with donations suggested to the National Association for Mental Wellness in lieu of flowers. I wondered if that was Quinn's idea, a way to honor the mental health struggles that had torn our family apart. Mom apparently didn't attend the funeral. According to a follow-up text from Quinn, we'd been exchanging messages every few months. She'd completely cut contact with everyone from our old life after moving to Arizona. She was living under her maiden name and had told her new coworkers that she'd never been married or had children. It's like she erased our entire family from her memory. Quinn wrote, Dad died alone except for me and Ethan. Even his brothers barely showed up. 2 years later, Quinn graduated valedictorian from Stanford with a degree in psychology and social work. I watched the live stream of her commencement ceremony, proud of her accomplishments, but careful to stay hidden in my Portland apartment. I could see Mom in the audience during the ceremony, looking decades older than her 56 years. Her hair had gone completely gray and she seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her choices. She kept scanning the crowd during Quinn's speech, probably hoping I'd surprise them by showing up for my sister's big day. I didn't. Quinn had kept her promise and never told them she'd found me. As far as they knew, I was still missing, still possibly dead. Still the son who disappeared into those storm drains and never come home. Some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. Some words once spoken can never be unheard. Some betrayals cut so deep that forgiveness becomes irrelevant because trust is impossible to restore. I have a good life now, 5 years after faking my death to escape my toxic family. I manage inventory and logistics for a sustainable clothing company that values creativity and ethical business practices. I have genuine friends who chose to love me without knowing my dramatic backstory. I'm engaged to someone named Avery who thinks I'm worth fighting for, who sees my value beyond my ability to produce achievements or maintain a perfect image. Avery knows the basics of my story, that I'm estranged from my family due to their inability to love me unconditionally. But I've never played the recordings or shared the specific details of their cruelty. Some wounds are too private to expose, even to people we trust completely. But sometimes late at night, when insomnia strikes and my mind wanders to dark places, I still hear my mother's voice on that recording saying, "Maybe this is for the best." I still hear my father calculating my worth in insurance dollars. I still hear my brother discussing how to perform grief for the cameras while real people risk their lives searching for my body. That recording taught me the most painful lesson of my life. The people who claim to love you most can be the ones planning your funeral while you're still breathing. The family that raised you can see you as nothing more than a problem to be solved, a burden to be relieved, a financial opportunity disguised as a tragedy. I've never gone back home to Maplewood, Ohio. I've never reached out to Mom or Ethan, despite Quinn's occasional suggestions that they've changed, that they feel guilty about their behavior, that they might be ready to have an honest conversation about what happened. Quinn visits me once a year during spring break, and we've built a careful relationship based on honesty, respect for boundaries, and mutual understanding that family is more than shared DNA. She's studying for her master's degree in family therapy now, partly inspired by our own dysfunctional background. "I want to help other families before they get to where we were," she told me during her last visit. "I want to teach parents how to love their kids unconditionally, even when they're struggling or different or not meeting expectations." Last month, she called with news that felt like a final chapter in a book I've been trying to close for years. "Mom's dead," she said simply. No emotional preamble or gentle lead-up. Heart attack in her apartment in Scottsdale. Her neighbor found her after 3 days. I waited for grief to hit for some complicated mix of sadness and relief. Instead, I felt the same emptiness I'd experienced when Dad died. A complete absence of filial emotion where love and loss should have been. "How do you feel about it?" I asked, genuinely curious about her reaction. "Sad," she said honestly. Not because of who she became, but because of who she could have been. Because of what our family could have been if she'd been capable of loving us the way we deserved. The funeral was private again with only Quinn, Ethan, and a few distant relatives attending. Mom had left behind a tiny estate, mostly consisting of her library job pension and the modest Arizona apartment that was split between her surviving children. "There's a life insurance payout," Quinn said carefully. "Not much, but enough to matter. She left equal shares to me, Ethan, and you." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. After calculating my death benefits and fantasizing about how my life insurance would improve their lives, Mom had left me money in her will, as if financial inheritance could somehow compensate for emotional abandonment. "I don't want it," I said immediately. "Give my share to charity or keep it yourself. I don't want anything from her." "I figured you'd say that," Quinn replied. "I'll donate it to that mental health organization Dad mentioned in his obituary. Seems appropriate." We talked for another hour about memories, regrets, and the strange process of grieving people who'd hurt us so deeply. Quinn was in therapy herself now, working through her own trauma from growing up in a family that valued appearance over authenticity, achievement over emotional health. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd never faked your death?" she asked toward the end of our conversation. "If you just stayed and tried to work things out?" I considered the question seriously. I think they would have kept treating me like a burden and a disappointment until I either actually hurt myself or just disappeared in a less dramatic way. The recording proved they didn't love me. They loved the idea of having a successful son, but they couldn't handle the reality of who I actually was. "You're probably right," she agreed sadly. "I just wish things could have been different." "They could have been," I said, "if they'd chosen to love me instead of judge me. If they'd seen me as a person worth supporting instead of a problem to be fixed or eliminated." That conversation was 6 months ago. Since then, I've been reflecting on the strange trajectory that brought me from a suicidal college dropout to a successful warehouse manager with a loving partner and a chosen family of friends who actually care about my well-being. The recordings are still on my phone, stored in a password-protected folder I haven't opened in over a year. Sometimes I think about deleting them, letting go of the evidence, moving forward without carrying proof of their cruelty. But they serve as a reminder of what conditional love looks like. Insurance against ever accepting less than I deserve from the people in my life. Avery and I are planning our wedding for next spring. Quinn will be my maid of honor, the only family member who earned the right to celebrate this milestone with me. She's bringing her girlfriend Olivia, whom she met in graduate school, and who understands complex family dynamics because of her own complicated background. Are you happy? Quinn asked me during her last visit to Portland. As we sat on my apartment balcony watching the sunset over the city skyline, I thought about the question carefully, considering not just my current contentment, but the journey that brought me here. Yes, I said honestly. Not because everything worked out perfectly, but because I learned to build a life around people who value me for who I am rather than what I achieve or how well I fit their expectations. I'm proud of you, she said quietly, for surviving, for building something good out of something terrible. That night, after she'd gone back to her hotel, I did something I'd never done before. I called Javier, my former supervisor who'd become a mentor and friend, and told him the entire story about faking my death, about the recordings, about discovering that my family saw me as expendable. Jesus, he said when I finished. No wonder you were so determined to prove yourself when you started here. You were trying to show that you were worth keeping around. He was right. For years, I'd been working overtime to demonstrate my value to everyone in my life, terrified that people would abandon me if I wasn't useful enough or successful enough. You know that's not how real love works, right? Javier continued. People who actually care about you don't keep score. They don't make you earn their affection over and over again. It was a lesson I was still learning even 5 years later. But surrounded by friends like Javier, a partner like Avery, and a sister like Quinn, I was slowly understanding what unconditional acceptance actually felt like. I recorded my family's reaction when they thought I died. And now I can never look at them the same way. Because I learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you most are the ones who will calculate your value in dollars while your body is still missing. I learned that family doesn't automatically mean love, and that blood relationships don't guarantee loyalty or kindness. But I also learned that you can build a new family from the people who choose to see your worth, who support your growth, who love you for who you are rather than who they want you to become. The recordings taught me to recognize conditional love and reject it completely. They taught me that my worth isn't determined by other people's ability to appreciate it. Most importantly, they taught me that survival sometimes requires walking away from toxicity, even when it wears the mask of family. Some wounds heal crooked and stay that way forever. Some lessons can only be learned through betrayal and abandonment. Some families are meant to be left behind, so you can find the people who actually deserve your love. I've never gone back home, and I never will. But I'm home now in a life I built with my own hands, surrounded by people who chose to stay. And that's worth more than any inheritance they could have left.